This is a truly remarkable time of year. I discovered a body on my property today. The snowflakes resemble little stars descending from the sky, and frost is painting the window panes. Actually, one of the security personnel did. He called me immediately, speaking in that hollow, low voice. He sounded, for want of a better term, dead. Within. "Miss Novak?" As if he hadn't fully considered what to say next, he became silent for a few seconds. You should come to the Red Meadow, I think." "What do you mean, you think?" I asked, a little irritated because I had been working on some computer job at the time. I immediately felt bad about my harsh tone. "There's a body." I almost dropped my phone. I stumbled to my feet and started fumbling for my keys after suddenly feeling strangely detached from myself. With a shaky voice, I said, "I'll be right there, Gus," and hung up. Just beyond the tree's eastern boundary lies a broad plain known as the Red Meadow. These weird, scarlet blossoms are all over it. Their petals resemble small hearts, and they are almost the same size as a typical daisy. Oddly enough, we haven't been able to recognize them. Although many flowers resemble them, none are exactly the same. They used to be my father's obsession. He picked and dried them constantly. However, he also never learned more about them. The meadow was blanketed in snow today, yet in some spots, the deep crimson of the blooms was still visible. Fergus was standing close to the tree line, waving at me stiffly. He jogged to meet me halfway, his shallow, laborious breaths rising from his lips in little plumes of vapor. His words were dry. "I didn't see it happen," he added. "He was there when I followed the screaming I heard. By the time I arrived, whatever had done it was gone." I followed him to the body. A man in his 30s wearing a lot of the same practical attire as the first cryptid hunter who had recently entered my land. My mind was spinning. How were these guys able to enter repeatedly? Gus said, "I think he died of fright. When I found him, he was lying on his stomach with one of his arms underneath him. Why'd he roll him over?" Looking for any injuries. Nothing was discovered, not even a blood stain, but take a look at his face. I let out a sigh. Admittedly, I had refrained from doing so until then. I gathered my big, way too big skirt at my sides and knelt beside the deceased man. I looked up into the vacant eyes of the deceased. I shook my head, trying to push the images of my little brother's severed head out of my thoughts. The look seems to be the same for everyone who dies in terror. For those who are unlucky enough to come across their bodies, their horror is preserved in their twisted grin. Fergus was most likely correct. The manner in which he had discovered this man indicated that he had been leaving the woods, most likely fleeing something. Another adrenaline addict who had overindulged. Seeing him here, past the tree line, was even more depressing. He had almost escaped unharmed. Then he must have collapsed, holding his chest, as the adrenaline must have overtaxed his heart. I pondered whether he had grasped the situation. Perhaps not. Perhaps he hadn't even anticipated it because he had been so afraid of whatever was pursuing him. In any case, all that had existed in his final minutes was him, this terrifying unidentified being, and his tired, deteriorating body. "Gus, are you all right? Would you like to return home?" "You need me here, don't you?" "I do, but I don't want you to go around like nothing happened when you've just found a body," I said. "I'll be all right. We have experienced deaths here before." I frowned at him in alarm. He didn't sound very credible. It felt awful to leave him on that note, but I didn't bother because he clearly didn't want me to, in the hopes that the remainder of the day would go well for him. I instructed him to go his usual path, but this body represented a lot more work to me. I would have to get rid of him first. We might eventually receive a visit from the cops, so it's not like we go completely unnoticed out here. My family now has 2 or 3 connections in the local government who are aware of the true situation in these forests. They'll probably make sure that no additional questions are asked if someone disappears on our property. It would be a carnage if a search were to be conducted in my woodland. Still, it's wise to avoid taking any chances. The corpse still had to go. Tossing it into the water was the simplest method. If I haven't already mentioned it, the lake is in a lighter, less heavily forested area around 20 minutes walk from the Crimson Meadow. Actually, it's a pair of lakes, joined by a ferocious ancient creek. But I was thinking about the larger one. If you put something in there, it will disappear quickly. Oh, right, fall in yourself. I made the quick decision to go for it because it hasn't frozen over yet this year. I have Jeanette, but I don't have a car that can carry a body across the forest. Jeanette is a mule. I had one of my employees, who is now staying at my family's house, bring her over immediately. After we loaded her up, I left. As usual, the woods were silent. Normally, I'm fine for walking by myself, but toting a corpse and a savage mule definitely dampened the atmosphere. Aside from the dead body bobbing up and down on the back of the animal next to me, I tried to concentrate on the dazzling snow beneath my boots and the numerous shiny icicles that gave the forest the appearance of a stalactite cave. We were progressing more slowly than I had anticipated. My bare shoulders were starting to sting from the cold air. That was significant, because I usually didn't mind it at all. Jeanette was acting quite dramatic. The times when she is most resistant are always when I truly need her assistance. This time of year, the sun was setting in the afternoon, and the treetops were already starting to get dark. Thin ice plates partially covered the quiet, undisturbed surface of the pond. I waited anxiously as I looked out across the lake. Even while it appeared serene, I was aware of how unstable this calm would be by dusk. "Grandfather!" I tried to speak quietly as I shouted out into the darkness. Now it's clear that the creature I was seeking to awaken isn't my real grandfather. The term Vodianoi is merely a moniker for him. Before I laid the unfortunate adventurer to rest in his waters, I had to speak with him and get his consent. There was an uncanny silence in the lake. "Grandfather!" I said it again, a bit louder. I detested having to speak louder. Silence is preferred in the woods. I was frustrated because I didn't hear back. Not even a single bubble rose to the surface, and the water continued to be an unblinking black mirror. I had to make a tough choice, because it didn't seem like Grandfather Vodianoi would arrive. Anything that might have heard me yelling to stop in was the last thing I wanted to stay for. Without contacting the boss, I would have to dispose of the corpse. I hauled the body off my mule and rolled it toward the lake's edge, against my better judgment. With a final, forceful thrust, it dropped down the little ridge and vanished with a satisfying plunk. A burden was lifted from my shoulders when I visualized it quickly plunging to the bottom. I only stayed for a minute, brooding in my sadness, and wondered if the Vodianoi would be upset with me if he discovered that I had turned his haunting grounds into a rubbish disposal when he woke up. There wouldn't be any time before that question was answered. I was about to walk away when I heard a huge, furious splashing noise. I whirled around and yelled in amazement as I saw the beast emerge from the dark depths. He was twice as big as me, a green-skinned old man with a horribly twisted face that looked more like a catfish's than a human's. He began to push himself up onto the dry land on his large paunch, his diseased, fatty lumps wrinkling and squirming grotesquely, and I staggered backwards. Scales covered his lower body, which narrowed into a fishtail, and algae hung in his long, tangled white hair. I felt guilty for not waiting for him sooner. Maybe he had heard me, lurking just below the surface, waiting for me to do something that he could rightfully punish. I sensed that my impatience was going to cost me dearly. "Grandfather, I'm sorry," I let out a cry at once. I was nervous. I had to be quick, He only gave me a gurgling giggle and threw me off balance by wrapping one of his webbed paws around my ankle without responding. I thrashed and kicked at his face while stupidly landing on my ass in the mud, but before I knew it, he had pulled me into a strong embrace. The smell he gave off made me gag as I pressed myself against his slippery, sagging chest. I felt so disgusted by the sticky sludge that covered his flesh that I had to heave as it rubbed off onto my face, arms, and clothes. I was dragged into the freezing water, now filthy with my own vomit. I could only scream like a banshee, because I was too stunned, both mentally and physically, to have any coherent thoughts. After giving me a thoughtful glance, the Vodyanoi released me and pushed me out onto the lake. I glided across the water. After my dress held me up, he yelled at me, "I do so despise impertinence," in a tone that was equal parts angry and amused. Every syllable he spoke sounded blubbering, wet, and raspy, as if he were retching water out of his lungs. "See you at the bottom." And with that, he sank without making a splash. I had been cautioned by Mom not to stand too near the water's edge. What on earth was I thinking? I began swimming once more in the direction of the crest, only to be horrified by how hard it was. The weight of my voluminous skirt seemed to double my endurance, and it was already drenched. I was surrounded by white. My puffed sleeves were now tight, like chains, squeezing my upper arms. I was struggling with my own wedding gown, and it soon won the battle. I could hardly remain afloat, much less make it to solid ground again. I couldn't hold my head above the water for very long. I was moving quickly, gasping for air, and getting closer to exhaustion. I was about to descend again when I noticed a frighteningly tall figure hovering over the lake. "Quick, take my hand if you want to live." The voice of the Leshy pierced the water. Even while I was underwater, I could clearly hear it. I threw myself out of the water, using what little power I had left, and grabbed for the hideous log-like arm he held out to me across the sea. I could climb it like a whole tree because it was long enough, but I was still too heavy, and the dress pulled me under. I was unable to get myself together. I pressed my fingers into the bark skin of the Leshy, spluttering and breathing heavily. "Shed your gown," the wood demon ordered, his tone swaying with eagerness. "Wench, it'll drown you." "I can," I let out a cry. "Hold on, pull, and I'll wait." With a roar, he suddenly pulled his arm back, dragging me with him. I experienced an unimaginable sense of relief as I plowed through the icy water. When I got close enough, he took me out of the water and placed me next to my mule, grabbing me with both hands. Jeanette had been sleeping under an ancient lakefront tree, not really caring that I had come dangerously close to death, coughing up cold water that is unclean. As I frantically rubbed my own upper arms in an attempt to restore some sense of feeling to my frozen skin, I huffed and panted, struggling to catch my breath. I was too preoccupied with myself to notice the Leshy change shape, but when I looked up again, I saw the bearded man with the cudgel standing above me. He questioned sharply, "Why didn't you get out of your dress?" I was unable to. "You honestly believe that I can simply pull down a zipper and it will come off? It's a nightmare to get into in the first place." He seems nearly irritated. Observing him exhibit such a human emotion was strange. However, he straightened up and cleared his throat after catching himself. "I hope you realize that you may have just caused me some trouble. This lake is ruled by the Vodyanoi. My intrusion is unlikely to be appreciated by him." "What are you better not?" He took a while to answer. Rather, he looked at me for a long time, evaluating me. "Eris, let me tell you something. I hope you arrive home safely and avoid being taken advantage of or freezing to death. As alone as you are out here, you will pay me back when I have saved you." Suddenly, the air felt even colder. I longed for a warm, dry blanket to throw over my shoulders, but my clothes were soggy that they would probably turn me into a statue. Even though I hated to acknowledge it, I needed his assistance. Kindly. "I'll pay you back accordingly," I said, gritting my teeth till I could speak. "But I'd be willing to bet you already have something in mind." "I'm having a terrible time, though. I have a terrible cold and excruciating back pain. You know, if you weren't so damned stupid, none of this would have occurred. Of course, having to grovel and crouch in front of someone like the wood demon has also seriously damaged my pride. I'm going to keep that to myself for a little while longer, but I had to make him a promise. Anyway, Casimir, my brother, is coming over. I probably talk to him more than any other member of my family. Aside from the money they pay me to assist with maintaining the safety precautions around the forest, there isn't much communication going on because the others have dispersed throughout the nation. Hell, most of the time, I have no idea what people do for a living. I know Casimir's a crook since he works as a real estate agent, and I've heard that one of my sisters got married to a wealthy man and now owns a gambling hall in Vegas. Well done, I suppose. Although he is taller, more slimmer, and has a hawk nose, Casimir and I do share some family resemblance. He resembles a humanoid bird of prey in every manner, but in a positive way. A number of unfortunate women have fallen in love with him since he is a really attractive man. Innumerable girls have already been enamored by his beautiful green eyes. They had to learn the hard way that he's also a complete jerk with unresolved mother issues. Lord knows how many times I've received texts and calls from tearful girls who wanted to know why he had vanished and had searched me up. In addition, he has a minor gambling problem. Sometimes that has also been an issue for me because I rely on the money my siblings send me to live and entertain the woods. He regularly gives me a sizable sum, but occasionally he will come around and demand repayment since he has accrued new debt. He occasionally thinks of other small side projects and invests money in them, but so far none of them have been successful, definitely a bit of a waste. But he remains my favorite brother. I like him not because of his behavior when he's not with me, but because of the person he is around. The problem is that he would go to any lengths for me. This morning, as I watched from my window, one of my staff members answered the door for him. Casimir rang the doorbell, ran a hand through his blonde hair that had been slicked back, and repositioned himself with the bouquet in his hand. Callous that are black, my favorites. I ushered him into my room shortly after. I had taken over the master bedroom as it was larger when our mother passed away, and Dad relocated to California. I had installed brand new wallpaper and threw out all of the furnishings. Actually, I've been remodeling every area in the house for a long time. These days, many of these are used as staff break rooms, with some equipped with mattresses or cots for naps. I still can't believe what you've done with the place, he said. Every time I come here, I keep expecting to see Mom and Dad's old room. It feels strange. Casimir said, depends on how long that is going to last, gesturing with his hand to show my overall condition. You look like shit. A friend of mine sent me this. He pulled out his phone and showed me a number of screenshots. As soon as I took them in, I moaned and felt a headache start. They were from an online article, perhaps from BuzzFeed or something similar, though I won't disclose the publisher. Someone had written about my forests, essentially recommending dark tourism. The description, the location, everything. Before you panic, keep in mind that this friend is actually one of the site's editors and has a stake in it. He recognized it when the author sent it to him. I'm really happy that I once told him where I'm from. Who knew it would work out? In any case, he had no trouble making it vanish on my behalf. Don't worry, he helped me bribe the author to never publish anything like again. Of course, it doesn't end there. We are an insider tip with the horror nerds, according to what I dug up about us. I decided it would be better to go see my big sister. My older sister will be aware of the situation, or not. Perhaps my older sister needs some time off. He patted down his shirt and leaned back in his chair, grinning. I whispered, "Oh man, you have no idea. It's been hell over here." After I told him everything, he moved into the guest bedroom and is likely to stay there for a few weeks. He'd been wise enough to take time off work to assist me. With his appeal, I'm sure he'll be able to locate more hires quickly. Tonight, we will reroute the guards' paths in an attempt to identify the blind spot through which all of these tourists continue to enter. Apart from that, having a close friend or relative nearby is truly a delight. Although I am somewhat of an introvert, as I have stated in the past, things are different with Cass. I've always been comforted by his presence, but previously, I had significant doubts about his IQ while I was assisting him in unpacking his suitcase. He had packed both pairs of our old figure skates. I looked at him for a long time, reproachfully, holding mine up by the laces. Are you serious? I believed Mom had thrown them out. He gave a shrug. I saved them. Why, additionally, don't tell me that you want to try your hand at it around the Twin Lakes once more. Why not? Casimir answered, his innocent wide eyes catching mine. You know exactly why. No, due to the other factor. Cass scowled. Oh, I apologize for forgetting the entire dress shame. I didn't believe you were still obsessed with Yasik. What? I did not mean that. You nearly passed away out there. I lost my temper. Ooh! My brother palmed his forehead and tossed his head back. All right, of course, but that's behind me now. I was at a loss for words. I clenched my teeth and said, I had to punch a girl's intestines for you. It will all make sense in due time. Yeah, and that's why I love you so much. I suppose I should tell you the backstory on this one. Cass and I used to go ice skating on the Twin Lakes when we were younger, which was before I started wearing my wedding dress, as you could have inferred from our chat. We were aware that it was somewhat risky, not just because the ice might crack beneath us, but we didn't give a damn. He had already learned early on that girls feel good on the inside, and he had experienced a growth spurt at the age of 14. Strangely enough, the fact that he frequently sought my counsel on courtship issues had actually strengthened our bond. After finding that we enjoyed ice skating together, we routinely practiced together in the aim of impressing each other on upcoming winter dates. We only visited real ice rinks throughout the season for years, but when I was 19 and he was 16, I proposed that we utilize the lakes instead. We lied to Mom and Dad, saying it was because it was almost right outside our door and we wouldn't have to pay for tickets there. I wanted to skate in the woods, but Casimir understood why. I'll tell you about that soon too, but since this isn't about me, let's just say I wanted to put on a show for someone who lived there. Our encounter had always been pure and utterly delightful. We always took care to avoid disturbing the forest or being too noisy. Even back then, we were that sensible. We were never worried either. But that one day in late January would be different. The lake we liked best, the smaller one, had a stiff, icy dancing floor. There, our blades had repeatedly scraped the ice. As we walked, we were quietly conversing. When we arrived at the location, we fastened our skates and immediately started using the large weapons. We were fairly proficient for two self-taught children, having already learned a few figures and jumps. However, we quickly realized that we had neglected to pack a drink, and we were far too thirsty to continue without one. I promised Cass that I would run back home and get us something so as not to interrupt our session. He assured me that waiting for me would be all right. Being nimble, I was able to run to the house and be back in half an hour. When I got back, I saw my brother beaming broadly. I asked him what had made him so tickled and gave him one of the bottles I had brought, but he refused to answer. I should have realized something was awry at that moment, but I dismissed it. We went home before nightfall and carried on with our skating. The whole time, Casimir was laughing to himself. The day following that, we had also wanted to go. Casimir was especially thrilled about the possibility. I always sleep in on the weekends, so when I got up at noon, my mother informed me that Casimir had already departed for the lake about 2 hours already. I asked, did he say anything else? No, however, he appeared quite excited, Mom said, cautiously cracking an egg into the frying pan she was supporting. Please take a seat, honey. Even though your brother abandoned me, you will still join me for breakfast, if it's still possible to call it that. I hurried away before she could catch me with a dish, telling her I would be back in a flash and expressing my sincere regret. All of a sudden, I felt quite uneasy about this. I quickly put on my jacket and left the house. I slowed down when I arrived to the lake, moving more stealthily and ducking behind trees as I approached. Before long, I saw Casimir sitting on the lakeshore ridge with his feet hanging barely above the ice. He was laughing, and it was clear what was making him happy. A female was tickling his neck, armpits, and chest while she sat on his lap. That explains why he had been so keen to return here. Most likely he had met her when I was away the day before. She was definitely non-human because she was entirely nude, but the fun they were having seemed harmless enough. Perhaps there wasn't really anything to be alarmed about, as I didn't really care who my brother hung out with, and many of the woodland people I'd met were friendly and generally calm. With the girl hovering over him, Casimir began to curl up in the snow, and his laughter filled the air. I turned around and left to return home, because I didn't want to stay and watch them make out. I became aware that Cass was laughing a bit too loudly at that point. He sounded as though he was having trouble breathing. I looked at the two again and frowned. He was now being physically restrained by the female. In reality, he was having difficulties. There was a problem. I started over the ice towards them, after emerging from the tree line, biting back my shame. At first, neither of them saw me. I was ready to yell at them when I became aware of something that caused me to halt. The girl was facing away from me, and although her long hair had previously obscured the entire area, it was now exposed when she lowered herself furthermore to press her face against Casimir's shirt. Her hair changed, exposing what could only be described as a paucity of skin on her back. Just looking at that made my stomach turn. Her ribs and surrounding red mass were exposed, as was her spine. I thought I might be able to glimpse her organs, red and pink skin that pulses and drips, the white gleam of bone. I had the impression that I was falling and that the ice underneath me was about to crack. It appeared as though the girl was half cadaver, with her insides surgically exposed. A real Mafka. For real. By now, Casimir was struggling to breathe. I stomped over to the two of them, yelling at the top of my lungs incoherently as his ragged cries tore me from my immobility. The female was thrown off my brother, and I threw myself on top of her after grabbing her by the shoulders. All she could do was sputter and whine, her face crushed into the snow. With my heart pounding in my ears, I plucked up all my bravery and pushed my fingers firmly into the gaps between her ribs. In an attempt to grasp the bone, I ruthlessly dug my claws in. "I'll rip it out." I ignored the vomit that was rising in my throat and screamed. "If you ever hurt him again, I'll rip it the fuck out." I believe I kind of forgot how annoying my brother is when I declared my love for him. Even though he's a goddamn adult with a job, a home, and roughly a dozen illegitimate children for whom he must pay child support, he acts like a small boy again when he's around me, and that's not how I mean it. After urinating his name in the snow outside the front door to start the day, he left a teaspoon of marmalade in one of my boots, brought me scrambled eggs with sugar and pepper, and continued to knock on the bathroom wall from the opposite side while I was trying to urinate. However, we are at least making some headway on the issue of trespassing. Since individuals who are currently working must constantly move between their designated areas of the forest, it is hard to gather together every employee, since it would be completely unproductive to prevent them from performing their duties. We made the decision to visit each of them while they were on their rounds. For the two of us, this would require a lot of walking, but we were game. "It's gotten even colder overnight," Cass said. "Aren't you going to take a jacket?" "You know I can't," I said somberly as I pulled on a glove with white fur trim. The tiny fluffy cape that was fastened to the specific bridal gown I was wearing that day was the only other item shielding me from the cold. "No point in complaining." "Even after all this time?" My brother laughed disparagingly at me. "Man, Chasek really dealt you a bad hand, didn't he?" I said abruptly, in a monotone and flat voice. "I don't want to talk about Jacek. Let's just get going." As we started our journey, Cass just shook his head, but at least he didn't say anything. As we marched through the snow, it was almost as if we were children again, with Jem and Marion just behind us if I turned around. "I've missed this," Casimir said abruptly, his voice full of regretful seriousness. His tone nearly made me start. I wasn't accustomed to this from him. "Me too," I reluctantly said. He continued, looking down at his boots. "I've tried to find other things to make up for it, but nothing ever quite compares." I had run out of things to say. The only thing we could hear for almost 10 minutes was the crunch of snow beneath our shoe soles. At last, we spotted Fergus walking along the woodland boundary next to the Crimson Meadow. He smiled at us, a little sleepy, and was drinking hot cocoa from his thermos. He claimed to have had problems sleeping, but said he was okay when I asked how he had been. I trust him now. Gus has been with us for a very long time. He would not betray us. But maybe he was aware of something. When the topic was posed to him, he pondered out loud, "Why would anybody make our location public?" Cash? Casimir offered without hesitation. I believe one of your colleagues is accepting bribes. It's a little disheartening to consider that. I mean, I spent a lot of time with the men. That's about all I can tell you right now, but I'll keep an eye out. We hurriedly bid our farewells and headed out to meet Jose, another senior employee who would be the next guard. We stayed to talk a while, even though he didn't know anything either, and he appeared genuinely worried. To put it briefly, we looked up the others as well, but we were unable to find anything. According to Cass, it was fortunate that we had at least informed others and expressed our suspicion that one of them was working against us. Nevertheless, we required answers, and I knew where to find them. Adjacent to the main structure on our property is a tiny bathhouse. I think it was built by my great-great-great-grandfather. We haven't used it in a long time, but it's really rather nice and has a steaming room and changing area. However, I still hire a woman to maintain the sauna. It's not as deserted as it might appear, as is the case with many areas on our estate. I was born there, so it's a wonderful spot. Hell, perhaps even conceived, though that is less likely. Although my mother maintained that it was a dangerous and highly valuable site for spiritual purposes, she never used it for any of the things she said could be done there. But that's not all. I made the decision to take a steam there when I was 16. Mom had been quite excited for us to try the bathhouse together, and she was pretty much the only one who ever truly used it. Until then, I had avoided the area completely. With all the discussion about otherworldly energy, it had always kind of frightened me. But I was also fascinated, and I decided it was time to give it a go when I was 16. In addition, steaming could be pleasant. So, on a day as chilly and wintry as today, Mom and I went inside. Mom told us to leave the crosses we were wearing around our necks at the door. I was a little perplexed by this, but I was happy to leave one of my boots outside for us. And we put our necklaces inside. As we entered the changing room, we each picked up a bath broom and undressed. Simple bundles of birch twigs served as the bath brooms. When I questioned Mom why we didn't just buy sponges or some real stuff for the bathhouse, she just said that it was best to stay with natural materials sometimes, even if their leaves were already all over the floor. We were sitting in the steaming room after turning on the sauna. Actually, I was really relaxed because not much happened. The space had rapidly heated up, but it was far hotter than the kind of heat you get in a sauna. Still, I kind of liked it, and my mom seemed to be all right with it. With the exception of the odd joke or comment, we didn't speak much. Why don't the others visit us? I asked. This is quite pleasant. Mom said, playing idly with her bath brush. Dad says he doesn't like the heat, but I think he's just scared. I'm relieved you're not. Is there anything to fear? Yes, the building is quite old, but... Oh, it's not the structure. It's the soul, she smiled meaningfully at me. We'll discuss it later. Shall we keep it low for the time being? To be honest, I was a little alarmed by that. Although that wouldn't have been my first experience with a supernatural being, you shouldn't lose respect for something simply because you're accustomed to it. So we're not alone at the moment? Quietly, I asked. Mom shook her head and smiled. She murmured, "He's hiding behind the benches," as she leaned toward me. Her words chilled me to the bone despite the heat. I got up and muttered, "I think I want to leave." Mom didn't say anything to stop me, although she did appear a little disappointed. I felt something sharp and pointy cutting horribly into my skin as it raked down my back as I was about to make for the doorway. When I screamed sharply and spun around, I saw that Mom was still sitting there, motionless as a statue, staring at me with wide eyes. I whimpered, "What the fuck was that?" Blood started to seep down my lower back. Letting rid of her strictness, my mother came running to embrace me while looking accusingly into the room. She yelled, "That was completely inappropriate," at an unidentified person. "Now, honey, hurry up." She took my hand and dragged me out into the changing room, saying, "If the wretched old grouch doesn't want company, we'll just be on our way now." We were about to enter the entryway when a stream of boiling hot water struck our backs. Stopping us in our tracks, Mom and I both let out a cry and turned around in time to see a thin, stooped figure vanishing behind the seats. A strange, creepy gibbering suddenly filled the air as my heart raced in my chest. It had a spooky, low, brittle voice and sounded like someone speaking backwards, but very quickly. "We have enraged whatever occupied that bathhouse." "Let's just go," Mom said with a little girl's squeak. I didn't need to hear it twice from her. Instead of taking the time to get dressed, we just picked up our things and ran through the snow back to the safety of our house, naked and barefoot. My father was laughing uncontrollably at us as he watched us through the glass. Care to explain? As I tried to put on my jeans with trembling, icy fingers, I gasped and hopped around on the carpet in the living room. With a sigh, my mom finally poked her head through the sweatshirt's opening after struggling with it. The bannock was that. After my great-great-grandfather constructed the bathhouse, he moved in. He must have been having a rough day. Even if he has previously done the scratching, Grandpa used to say that if you take a steam round Christmas and the bannock scratches you, it's a sign that the coming year would be difficult. But, I don't really care. The old skunk had better keep his hands off you since you're my daughter. But the scratching thing, is that like an actual prediction? Still a little shaken, I asked. "Oh, I'm not sure." In any case, I wouldn't put my trust in the bannock. Put a cranky, stupid geezer he is. He asks the woods demons to join him for a nighttime bath, He doesn't want any crosses or religious objects inside because of this. Shouldn't we see to it that he's, appeased? I asked warily. Mom gave a snort. "I refuse to. If he wants to, let him vent his anger inside. I don't care if he burns down the bathhouse. I won't be returning there anytime soon." I sneaked outside with a pail of water the same evening. I had foolishly filled it to the brim, so I had to be quite careful not to spill anything, and there was a pink block of soap swimming around in there. To make my task more challenging, I had a handful of fir branches tucked under my arm. When I eventually arrived at the sauna, I sat down in the snow and knocked on the door. "Hello?" I tried not to tremble my voice as I called out quietly. There was absolute silence in the bathhouse. If there were ghosts within, they were having a very private party. "I apologize for disturbing you, but this is Fiona from earlier. I've come to express my regret. Even though I didn't think I had done anything wrong, it was wise to be modest around creatures like this one. Even then, I was aware of that. My point of view probably didn't matter to the bannock." The building's door opened ever so gently. Behind it, complete darkness awaited, and I had the impression of a giant bear gaping. This almost prompted me to go inside, but I chose to leave the bucket and the branches on top of the stoop instead. My heartbeat sounded so loud to me that I still think the monster within must have been able to hear it. When a skeletal arm with sagging, wrinkled, pale skin reached out from the dark aperture to draw my offerings inside, I nearly leapt. I was relieved that the bannock did not close the door right away. Seeing my chance, I plucked up the strength to speak up once more. "I wanted to know if that was a sign you previously provided me. Will the new year truly be a dismal one for us?" There was silence for a minute. Then came the weird babbling once more. I found that noise to be really unsettling for some reason. I thought about turning around and running for the home, my skin crawling, until I realized that I could actually make out some words in the confusion. "Particularly for you." I swallowed, fear accumulating like a thick, chilly liquid in the pit of my stomach. "What's going to happen to me?" "I don't know exactly." "Am I gonna die?" I muttered, tremblingly. "Just a part of you." "Please, sir, tell me what you mean," I pleaded, becoming frantic. Something seemed to have moved him enough to call me closer in that breathy, rattling voice of his, whether because of the dread in my voice or because I had brought him those gifts. I squatted down in front of the partially open door and cautiously climbed the stoop. "Are you going to maintain this bathhouse? Will you bring me some soap and water and make sure it's clean?" I said, "If that's what you want," softly. "Then hold your head and receive my gift." Then he touched my forehead with a gnarly finger. There was a damp patch between my eyebrows, from his silky, moist skin. This will help you spot impending danger when it's hiding in plain sight, but it won't give you the ability to see into the future. Although it's not perfect and you could still be a victim of your own ignorance if you're not careful, I'm confident that it will help you overcome your own lack of common sense. After he pulled his arm away, the door closed and I was alone in the pitch-black night with only the whistling winter wind for sound. From this strange meeting, a sort of business partnership has grown over time. Even if I don't use the bathhouse very often, the Bannock values the work I put into it. I frequently hear sounds coming from inside at night, borne by the breeze to the main building. I could tell there was a disruption in the aura of the one cryptid hunter I met because of the Bannock's gift. It's something, even if it's obviously just an overstimulated instinct and not at all trustworthy. He also blessed me with an increased ability to tolerate uncomfortable temperatures when I began wearing my bridal gown.